Now more than ever, people need to go within and plug into that cellular memory, plug into divine source, detach as much as possible from the matrix. Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. Today, our very special guest is Kewaunee Lapseritis and Kelly Lapseritis. Kewaunee is a holistic health consultant, master herbalist, and master dowser with backgrounds in anthropology, psychology, conservation, and holistic health. His academic degrees are from Greenfield Community College, Greenfield, Massachusetts, University of New Hampshire, Durham, North Adams State College in North Adams, Massachusetts, and University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He also attended Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Kewaunee taught anthropology for 1 year at North Adams State College and later taught dowsing and psychic development at the Wisconsin Society for Psychic Research, Milwaukee. As a world authority on the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomenon, he has meticulously researched the subject for the last 55 years. Mr. Lapseritis is also a social scientist and both a Sasquatch and ET contactee. As a world traveler, an amateur naturalist, and avid backpacker with wilderness skills, Mr. Lapseritis spent 5 years out of the country living in England, East Africa, and Japan, later immigrating to Australia, and has visited over 40 countries around the globe. He was in the Himalayas in 1968 investigating the Yeti, or abominable snowman. In 1973, he conducted an ethnographic study in conjunction with the Colombian Institute of Anthropology in Bogota, living amongst the Ticuna Indians of Upper Amazonia. His websites are The Sasquatch People and PsychicSasquatch.com. Kewaunee Lapseritis and Kelly will be conducting conferences in early September, and we'll have all of Kewaunee's website and contact information on our website, The Cosmic Switchboard, as well as on our dedicated YouTube channel. So without any further ado, Kewaunee and Kelly, welcome to the Cosmic Switchboard Show.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, James. It's an honor to be here.
Well, the honor is all ours. For many years now, many of us have known that there is this intrinsic connection between the UFO phenomenon, the ET phenomenon, and Sasquatch. And for too long, these, I guess, nuts and bolts Sasquatch Bigfoot researchers, they kind of look askance at what they consider the woo-woo information, when in fact it's the high strangeness aspects of Sasquatch that is where the real information lies. That information forms the core of your two books, Kewaunee, The Psychic Sasquatch and Their UFO Connection, and The Sasquatch People, the interdimensional connection. For the benefit of our listeners, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into this work?
Well, I read an article back in 1956 about the Sasquatch people, and they didn't refer to them as people, but immediately I accepted them as a people, and why I became so fascinated, I'm not sure, but it's been now 61 years that I had been doing the research. I've experienced them in Western Massachusetts. I was a bit shocked when I had an encounter in Scotland in, November 1965. When I was climbing to the top of Ben Nevis, the highest mountain in Great Britain. So I've had many different experiences. To date, over 1,000 contacts since 1979, when they first started talking to me. And when they did, there was an ET and a Sasquatch talking to me, and that really confused me. I was not afraid or anything. I was just very confused. And I said, well, I'll never tell anyone because it's, a one-time thing and it sounds pretty crazy. And that was back then, but I never realized it would become ongoing for 38 years now. At that time, when they first contacted me, I was assistant director of a Native American agency, urban Indian agency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was working part-time as a hypnotherapist and had been doing a series of lectures at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So I was very ill prepared for all this psychic stuff, and it was a little confusing, but in no time, in 2 days later, while I was sleeping, 2:45 in the morning, a voice woke me up saying, "Wake up, my friend, we are here." And I thought, oh no, a burglar broke into my apartment, and I expected someone pointing a pistol at me. But when I rolled over, there were two Sasquatch interdimensionally where I could see through them. And they kept visiting me for nearly 2 months, off and on every so many days. And I started to recognize different ones. When I didn't see one for a while, come back and I said, oh, I hadn't seen you in a while, kind of thing. But they're people, they're not animals. They do have an animal-like body in order to survive in raw nature. But in Australia, the Yowies claim exactly the same thing. Aboriginals people, that the Yowies interact with star people. They, in fact, taught them. And I have a lot of information. I even include that in my second book, The Sasquatch People and Their Interdimensional Connection, about Australia, because it's very apropos, where they refer to them, at least this particular tribe, as Dulligan people. They're all over the world, and in July of 1985, they said that there are 7 different races of their people, that some are 3.5 feet tall. Some are, around 5 foot tall, and so on, 6 and 7 foot, until some of the races are gigantic and have been reported up to, 15 and 16 feet tall. Some conservative researchers would not agree with me, but they haven't done extensive research or had any experiences to understand that. You see, they're collecting tracks and hair, and I did all of that as a scientist, but it got me nowhere. And of course, the most information I got directly from them. So tracks and hair and whatever else you may find don't talk. They don't communicate back and forth. And so I don't find that valuable, because I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to share the information and what I experienced. To date, I have documented 407 people, 407 percipients that have had telepathic communication with the psychic Sasquatch. 3 of them were physicians, 1 was an attorney, 3 were college professors, and 2 were scientists, and then people from all walks of life. I sort of view the statistical part this way, that William James said it takes only 1 white crow to prove that all crows are not black. Well, analogously speaking, I have 407 white crows. How many more white crows do I need for mainstream people to pay attention that these are not monsters, they're not animals, they're an evolved people? And so in order for them to start communicating with them rather than stalking them or trying to exploit them with photographs and then make money on it, or murder one and have a body and get rich kind of thing. And so they know this, and they're very much against those kinds of people. That's why all those people that believe that it's just an animal have almost zero proof of anything. And they've had no experiences, or they might have seen a shadow of one leaving or something. But basically, they're still in the dark. They still don't understand who the real Sasquatch are.
They seem to be, like you pointed out, a distinct species with star connections. Did they talk about their origins, how they came to be here on Earth, and the nature of their metaphysical interdimensional abilities? Did they talk about a symbiotic relationship with those of us here on Earth?
They are the guardians of the planet. They were given this when there were no people here by the friendly star people. And they were also meant to be helping the humans, which they did. I don't know how far back. I think it was from what they said the time of Atlantis. And, when they're talking and sharing some of this information, at times, I feel like an actor in a science fiction movie. But the difference is it's all for real. And in a sense, I guess we ask people to believe what we're doing because I guess there's so many people that they've shared parts of this information with that have come forward and said, hey, that happened to us, but they didn't give as much information for a book or anything. But it certainly aligns with what I discovered. I'd like to read something here from my second book about the Australian Aborigines. A woman named Lorraine Moffey Williams, who is a Aboriginal medicine woman, made this statement, and I'm going to quote her. In ancient times, not only the seven spirit brothers came to Earth, but two other different races there were, like refugees, almost from a disaster planet. In this country, which is Australia she's talking about, I believe that they called these beings Bigfoot. And she says in this country, actually she was lecturing in New York at the time. So she says in Europe, the Yeti. In my country, the white people called them the Yowie. But we call them the Dulligan. They were like liaison people from the planetary helpers, the star people, to us human beings. In my country, in the hills, the young men and older men used to go and receive teachings from the Dulligan people. The Dulligan were also hosts for other planetary helpers. When other planetary helpers came down to Earth, they did the job in secret and silence. Nobody knew. Only the Dulligan people would converse with them. In now times, they're not actually extinct, but they hide quite a bit. When they're on Earth, they hide, but they go up, back and forth to whichever planet they go to. And they are the teachers, actually, and they pass down to us, human beings, the knowledge, and they help us, end quote. So that's what information they shared with Sunbo, a colleague of ours who transcribed the book, The Sasquatch Message to Humanity, book 1 and 2. So it all matches up, and information that they told me. I'm not going to, I have no demands for proof other than I believe that this information is correct. It's matching up with other contactees, their information.
Do you find some kind of commonality between the people that the Sasquatch people have contacted, such as yourself and others? Is there something about their lineage or something about their past lives or something that they have in common?
Yes, they really didn't share that at first, but I figured it out. And I asked them, I said, is my soul from another planet? His answer wasn't yes or no immediately. He said, in asking that question, you are one of the rare people who has figured this out. You have been with us for many millennia, for eons, and you have chosen to come into a human body in order to have experiences and share this information in order to wake up and expand people's consciousness instead of destroying the planet. See, capitalism to me is like a political cancer. It's based on supply and demand, and where do they get it all? From the environment. That's where the resources are. So we've plundered the earth and have made a mess of it. The planet's dying, they said, and they're upset because they're the keepers of Mother Earth. So they said there's several people like me, and those are the ones having ongoing experiences, like my wife Kelly and my son Jeremy and many other people out there that we're in contact with.
That may suggest that the Sasquatch people have likewise had a long-standing connection to Kelly and your son.
Absolutely.
Now, what I've heard from other people that have had ongoing Sasquatch encounters, and also Sasquatch appearing in their dreams and talking to them telepathically, Sasquatch has passed on what seem to be like warnings, if you will, or an idea of what may be a possible scenario. some people call these earth changes. Some people, have other names for them. Has Sasquatch given you folks any idea of possible outcomes in this particular timeline? Like what may happen if we don't get our act together?
They don't give a timeline. They've never have, and sometimes they've said to me, soon this is going to happen. And a year went by or 10 months and it happened. One time they said something was going to happen to me, and 5 weeks later it did. So when they speak in generalities often in terms of time, and for one reason, they don't want to give too much information because they understand karma.
Yes.
They said karma is very, very real, and that if they tell us too much or give us too much guidance so we don't experience what we're supposed to hear, then our karma becomes their karma, they said. And the ETs discussed this with me years ago. They said, we think that in reincarnation that you were one person in England back, 100 years ago, and now you're this and that. And he said, it's really all one life that we weave. Our souls weave in and out of bodies, and we can go to another planet if we're evolved enough in order to do certain missions and stuff to help that planet move forward and to be in balance. When I asked about, well, what about God and all this? And they said, well, God has given the command to the evolved ETs to put humans and put other beings on different planets to seed them. They use the word seed, that we were seeded here. And so we're the Sasquatch. So apparently this is what's going on, and that in other planets and other parts of the galaxy and universe, there's something that, keep in mind, we're still a young planet, and we're not really modern. Really an erroneous statement saying this is a modern society. To me, modernist doesn't have anything to do with technology, because right now technology has superseded our spiritual development.
Yes.
So we want to settle everything through violence and wars and other negative things. That's not being modern at all. Modernness comes from evolution of your soul by being compassionate, by being empathetic, and by caring and keeping in balance oneself, as well as keeping other beings and animals and plants in balance by not destroying them, because they all have a soul. They all have a spirit. And they've explained a lot of things, and a lot of it parallels the First Nations people, the Native American people, and their philosophy, because they were so close to nature as well.
Kelly, did you want to add to the discussion, and could you talk a bit about, I'm sure there must have been a synchronistic aspect to you and Kewaunee meeting in the first place, and how, from your perspective, your voyage of discovery and all this, how did that play itself out?
Yes, well, it was, quite the event. The Sasquatch really helped to bring us together. I started going through a spiritual awakening, and then I had a series of dreams that involved Kewaunee, and this was before I met him or knew him or anything. I had purchased his book, and I saw his picture in the back of the book, and so that's how I was able to recognize him in the dream. And then I found myself calling him for advice and on the experiences that I was having, because I was also getting communication from star people and Sasquatch people, and I was trying to put that into perspective. And so without us, really knowing it, it was the Sasquatch and our guides that were helping to bring us together. And then they started giving us more information, like I said, through a series of dreams and visions. They came to explain to me that we are destined to be, to help one another and to work together, and all of these things. And they said that we were soulmates. And this took us both by surprise, because we weren't ready to hear that, either one of us. Even though Kewaunee had been told by the Sasquatch for several years, actually, on different occasions, that he would be meeting his soulmate later in life. And so we were just both kind of hesitant because our life situations were so completely different. We lived 2,000 miles away from each other, and our lifestyles were very different. And there's, a big age gap between us. So it was hard to make sense of the fact that we're soulmates and are supposed to be together. But the more time that we spent talking on the phone and getting to know each other better, and, we fell in love over the phone without either one of us really admitting that, I think. But it came to the point that he decided to come visit me in Arkansas. And so we did, and we just knew right away that we were in love. And so it kind of took off from there. And really it was the Sasquatch that guided me and us the whole way. But I knew that I was a part of this. I just knew within my heart that that this was my future, a part of my life, even though I didn't quite understand it. And I have a lot of, dreams and visions and things. And I've learned now that my timeline with these things are about 3 years ahead of time. Because I will have a knowing or an intuition of something to come. And now I've experienced it enough times to see that it's about 3 years later that most of these things start to occur. And that's kind of where we're at right now also with what we're doing with the conference. I had dreams and visions of that, but I didn't understand what it was. I didn't know it was a conference. It was just a gathering of different great souls and allies to the Sasquatch people. And so last year, after we had our first conference, that's when I really understood that, okay, so I'm given these visions ahead of time so that I can help prepare and plan for them. So it's they've just been such a great blessing in our life, and now we're planning the second annual one that's coming up in just a couple weeks, and we expect it to be even bigger and better than the year before, because the Sasquatch helped to plan all that out too, including the dates and the location and everything.
Yeah, it's called the Spiritual and Psychic Sasquatch Conference and Retreat. And that's September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd here in Chewelah, Washington, 40 miles north of Spokane.
That's right in the heart of Sasquatch country. That's wonderful.
Very much so.
It sounds to me, and your story parallels my own story with my partner, Kylie. We have somewhat of an age gap too, but in practice, we're so much in sync that the age difference just dissolves into a non-issue. And she likewise reached out to me because she was familiar with my work, and then what really happened was just a continuation of lifetimes of connection between her and I. So it's a wonderful and heartwarming story that you just shared, Kelly. Thank you so much for that. Another commonality we have is that I've had ET contacts myself throughout my life. And I had a Sasquatch dream years ago in 74, 75, which turned out to be a big Sasquatch ET year. Could you tell a bit, either of you could start off here, about how the ET connection has manifested itself to you? Because there have been waves, as you know, over time when Sasquatch would be seen in close proximity to a craft, either a landed craft, a hovering craft, or Sasquatch would be seen to descend from a light, or whatever the case may be. Could you tell us how this manifested into your consciousness, where you saw the intrinsic connection between Sasquatch and the ET people? Keeping in mind security and all that, because I'm very security consciousness, if you feel comfortable talking about the ET races that you're in comms with, because I know that that's something that some of us like to keep close to the vest, which groups we're in contact with. So, just keeping that in mind.
Yes, well, the first time that they contacted me with the telepathy that confused me there in Wisconsin, the Sasquatch there kept saying, I am here and I've been watching you for a long time, longer than you know or understand right now. And I got really uncomfortable because I didn't understand what was happening. And I felt a little spacey because of his energy. And when I moved away from the woods into the field, And I stood and looked back, and all of a sudden, a very sophisticated voice said, "And I too have been watching you for a long time, uh, uh, and and longer than you know or understand." He said the same thing, and I looked around, and he said, "I am a star person right now in another dimension, just above you, in a UFO, as you people call it." And so I thought, what? And I had read an article in a UFO magazine. I don't know, maybe 10 years or 5 or 10 years before, about a possible Bigfoot UFO connection, but they didn't have enough of anything. But when just a suggestion of that, I said, "This is crazy. It's ridiculous." Of course, I come from a background of anthropology. I'm a social scientist. So, but here it was, staring right at me, and that reality hit me pretty hard. Since then, I've seen 7 different races that have come and visited me. Some of them came and healed me when I had a ruptured disc and it was unable to walk. I was in a wheelchair. They healed me, and the next morning I got up and walked. It was just like something out of a sci-fi movie. So it was interesting because after I started walking, and which the doctors told me that I'd never walk again unless I had this surgery, which was experimental, and I refused. And I started telepathing to these ships that were, as strange as it was, I lived in a cabin in Oregon at the time, in the Oregon Cascades, in the foothills. And I was seeing in the evenings these spaceships coming in. They're always in this particular line, and they were very low. I mean, real low, maybe a couple hundred, 200-300 feet above the ground, even in some areas. So just I had a whim, and being desperate because nobody could help me, and I just laid in bed. Friends and neighbors came with food and did my laundry for me and stuff, but the pain was so bad that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, my pain was a 10.5. To see myself in the mirror, I didn't even look like the same person because of the pain. It just drained me. So I telepathed and for 2 days. And in early evening on the second day, I just broke down and wept because I was the frustration and the pain and thinking they were going to come, even at least answer my request, and nothing. And it was a heartache. It was really hard because the pain was so intense, and I was getting only 4 hours sleep a night, and that it wasn't very sound sleep either. So that night when I shut the light off to go to sleep, as soon as I shut it off, there was shuffling of feet behind me. And as best I could, I turned around as best I could see, and there were 3 4-foot beings in little spacesuits. They weren't the normal grays or anything like that. And at any rate, they reminded me of the Anderson affair that took place. There's a couple books out on that. They looked like those kind of beings. And anyway, they said, "We're here to heal you." And I said, "Thank you. God bless you." And then they put me out. The next thing I knew, I heard this strange voice in my head of different beings talking. And it was very, very strange kind of chatter. And it brought me to consciousness. When I looked up, there was one of the beings was to my left, one to my right, and there was one with a cylindrical object in his hand right beside me doing something. And I looked up at him and I said, "Oh, it's only you. I love you." Really, I mean, what do you say to beings that have come to heal you when you're in that debilitating state? And the word "God bless you" is one of the highest forms of adulation in the universe. Even "I love you," since God and love are synonymous. So that's what I said to them. I mean, heck, they didn't even ask me if I had insurance. So But the next morning, 10.5 hours later, I had such a sound sleep. I was refreshed and zero pain. And I sat at the edge of the bed giggling for about 15 minutes, saying my morning prayers and just giggling. I was still in a state of shock of the what had happened the night before and total disbelief. So the interesting part of all this is 2 weeks later, I wanted to visit a very close friend of mine who owned a 1,000-acre ranch in the wilderness. And every maybe once a month or something, I would drive the hour drive into the wilderness and spend a few days with him and his family. So I was planning on visiting him that weekend, and it was on a Friday, and they didn't have ATMs back then where you could draw money out any time. And I realized that I didn't have enough money for gas and stuff, that I had to run to the bank and make a withdrawal. But when I looked at the clock, they closed at 5 o'clock. I had to drive 13 miles into Roseburg, Oregon. Well, I found a place and I started jogging down the street because it was 7 minutes to 5 and it closed at 5. When I got to the corner right across the street from the bank, there's one of the doctors that had examined me walking across the street with his eyes as big as golf balls looking at me. And he was
You come sprinting by.
And he kept patting his head, and his mouth was moving, and he's pointing to my feet, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. And I just looked at him and said, "Have a nice day, doctor." And I jogged across to the bank.
That's beautiful. You got to the bank in time, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Kelly, tell us a bit about your ET experiences, because they're such a formative, intrinsic part of this whole experience. So I think our listeners would benefit about how the ET factor, played in your life.
Yes. Well, ever since I was a child, I felt a connection, and I had a few, bizarre circumstances that I couldn't quite explain, but I didn't understand what it was until I was older. So now in retrospect, I'm able to understand that it was, the guidance of the ETs around me. But the first time that I was really aware of it, it was a similar situation to Kewaunee's, where an ET and a Sasquatch woman visited me at the same time. And there was a UFO. I was just going to bed at night. It was around 11 p.m. And I was just getting into bed alone, and I could hear this very loud machine above my house, and it was shaking the windows. It was rattling everything. It even rattled a picture off the top of my TV, and I could see a very bright light outside just coming through the curtains. But I couldn't move. I was stuck to the bed. As much as I wanted to get up and look out the window to see what was going on, I couldn't. And so I started to, just barely, the panic kind of feeling started to creep in. And then immediately I was aware of the presence of two different beings in the room. One was a man named Jai, and he was an ET who looked very human. He was humanoid, except he was a little kind of short, and his head was a little bit bigger than a typical human's, but he looked, very humanoid, and he was wearing clothes that reminded us of like a doctor. And along with him was a Sasquatch woman named Suni. And she didn't say anything to me, but telepathically she was comforting me. And they both, reassured me with their energy that this was all okay, and that, this was for my highest good. This was something that I have agreed to, and something that I've been preparing for, and all of this. And so it really did bring comfort to me, because they must have blasted me with some kind of energy or something to so that I wasn't so nervous and squirmy about what was going on. It was more anticipation and excitement that I was being visited. This was in November 2012 that I had this experience, and it came immediately before I called Kewaunee the next day, actually, to talk about what had happened. So that was my first real awareness that they work together and that I really had a connection with the ETs. But since then, I work with them quite often in different ways. They work through my consciousness a lot. They'll give telepathic messages, or they also have helped to heal me of different things. One time I had a bad back injury, and they healed me immediately overnight. I also woke up feeling fine. It was not as severe as Kewaunee's, of course, but it was some kind of pulled muscle or something that I knew would be hurting me for quite some time, at least a week or two that it would take to recover from it. And I woke up perfectly fine. Other times that they've healed me of colds or sinus infections and things like that. But more so, the greatest connection that I have with them is the teachings that they give to me, and knowledge, and they guide me to higher wisdom. A lot of times it happens in the dream state, and some things I can recall and some things I can't remember all the details. But there's been many times where I go on board a ship while I'm sleeping, and I've also journeyed there in meditation before as well. But I'm being schooled and taught how to use different shamanic tools for healing, and I'm also being downloaded a lot of information. And it's difficult for me actually to put some of this into words, because I see things in visions and numbers or patterns, and lots of sacred geometrical patterns, and lots of like numerology type things, and so it's hard for me to describe it into human words, but in my head and in my heart, I understand and I can make that connection. So it's teaching me how to also access the Akashic records, so that I can learn all of this higher wisdom on my own and develop greater psychic abilities and be able to help our planet and humankind with, some of the hang-ups that they might have, whether it be some kind of emotional trauma that they're trying to heal from, or something like that oftentimes the Sasquatch or the ETs will instantly tell me something that could help these people, even if it wasn't something I had prior knowledge of. They might tell me of a different stone that could help them, like a different kind of crystal, or advise me on what I should tell this person to help them, down to even, some herbs or different things like that. Like what Kewaunee is a master herbalist, so he's more proficient in that than I am. But there's been quite a few times where somebody just seeks some advice, and I'm just flowing with the information, and I know it's not coming from me, it's coming from a much higher source. So, my connection with them, and we're all related to our star elders. They're the ones that seeded the human race here. So it's just a matter of opening up and allowing ourselves to remember our connection to our star elders and our ancestors.
Kewaunee, did you want to add something to that about your connection and perhaps how the ETs have taught you and shown you things?
Well, mostly the Sasquatch were teaching me or telling me different aspects of what to do and how to help a person. For example, in 1989, I just briefly met a couple with 3 kids, and they lived in the deep wilderness. And I met them through some other people, another man, and it was very, very brief. And they seemed like nice people. And I didn't know anything about them or anything. But they were very good friends of my friend. And when my friend went out of the country, he asked me to house sit, which was actually a luxury cabin in the wilderness. And so I did. And one night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I get this phone call from this man and telling me that his wife is dying and he needs my help. And could I come right away? And the Sasquatch were listening in on the line, a Sasquatch, and said, yes, you can go. You should go. And when they give me advice, I don't question it. I just do it. And he said that his wife was an asthmatic, and she had 2 or 3 asthmatic attacks a month, but they were all small, nothing life-threatening or anything like that. And she was she had a little garden and had a few herbs in her garden, and she tried that because she had this massive attack, and it didn't work. The man was very proficient in shiatsu acupressure. He used that. It didn't work. I took her to a naturopath. Nothing worked. Acupuncturist. Finally, to the ER and giving her shots, which they were very natural in how they wanted, whatever they wanted to put in their body. So they did that last, and it didn't do anything. The shot did not do anything. So she hadn't eaten or slept in 4 days, and they didn't think she was going to last another 12 hours. So when I saw her, I tell you, it scared me. Actually, halfway there, because I had to go deeper into the wilderness, the Sasquatch kept talking to me, and I said, "Where are you?" He said, "Right now, I'm in a ship above you, following you with my Star People friends." And I said, "Look, I'm going to need your help. This sounds really serious." He said, "Don't worry, we will help you." So I thanked him. And when I arrived and saw her, she was lying down, and she was literally a living skeleton. And she was actually a very attractive woman, but at this time, she looked horrible. Her eyes were deeply set in her skull, and there were dark circles all around her eyes, and she was gasping for breath. Every breath she had to concentrate on, and she couldn't talk because she had no energy, and she had to just breathe. That was the biggest thing. So I asked the man to leave the room and do not come in under any circumstances. So I'm also a shaman, and I had my medicine bag, and I did my shamanic thing and took out 2 crystals that were very different than the average crystals people get. And as I prepared myself and built up energy, I noticed all of a sudden behind me all this energy, and there were 3 Sasquatch and 2 ETs behind me, and it kind of in a semicircle. And as soon as I picked up the crystals, put one on her chest and one at the lower part of her neck in her cervical spine, she took one sigh, one breath, and started breathing normally, just instantaneously. Actually, I wish I could do that all the time, but that's because of their power and their abilities. And she started to be normal, right? I mean, instantly, as a matter of fact. They were poor people, so I didn't charge them anything. And 2 days later, she called me up and asked if I would come over. She wanted to make a nice dinner for me. Well, she had had asthma her whole life, and this time it almost took her life. And they were leaving to go to Hawaii to get a new start, and they wanted to live there. So a week after that, they were gone. And a year later, I was in a health store, a grocery store, getting organic foods, and I noticed these little kids running around, and I looked up, and there she was, looking very radiant and of course, very different. And we said hello and all this, we're very surprised. And I said, "Well, didn't it work out? I thought you were in Hawaii." She said, "No, it didn't work out for us, but we loved and missed the Pacific Northwest, so we're back." And I said, incidentally, I said, "How is your asthma doing?" She says, "I don't have asthma anymore."
Wow. That's a wonderful story.
These things changed my life too. I mean, it isn't like, the nuns in parochial school told me all this was going to happen.
The Sasquatch being a distinct people, they have a distinct culture. And you mentioned the Andreessen Affair book earlier, which that whole series of books, The Watchers included, is a
Yeah.
classic in the ET field because it delves into a lot of a particular ET culture. Now, in your experiences with the Sasquatch people, have they taken you interdimensionally or whatever the case may be, where you saw glimpses of their culture, how they interact socially, and that kind of thing?
They have taken me twice. The first time, they were going to take me to stay with them. This was in Texas, northeast Texas. I told them, I said, "Well, it's my birthday tomorrow. Could you, take me? That would be a nice present." And I was talking to a female ancient one, not a Sasquatch. Now, the ancient ones look like a Sasquatch at a distance, but they have round heads, not peaked heads or sagittal crests like a Sasquatch. They have human faces, very human, and rather than ape-like faces like the Sasquatch. Their arms are in proportion to their bodies like ours, where the Sasquatch, their arms go down to their knees. So that's the difference. Now, they were going to take me, but two truckloads of people with rifles showed up.
Jeez.
Somehow it got out, and they were trying to hunt these people down, the forest people. So they said they had to quickly leave and go over the border into Oklahoma, into the Kewaunee wilderness. So, but that night, Haloti, and that's the woman's name, the ancient one's name that I befriended there, asked the Star People to take me then. And they took me 12 years ahead into a totally different timeline. And they taught me different types of healing. And they brought me back, though, to the same time. So all this was shared with me the next morning by Haloti. And she says, "You've been given powerful healing knowledge. It will germinate and be there in time when you need it to help others. Use it to help others, not for gain," she said. And I said, "Well, why can't I remember that?" Because they took you back to the same time. I said, "Well, why? I mean, how come I can't remember a lot of this?" And she said, "Because they want you to use your free will. That if we get involved in with telling you everything and doing everything for you, you're going to have this knowledge, but it's up to you how you use it. So you must use your free will." The second time, I was in Oklahoma for 3 weeks in the Kewaunee wilderness, and Haloti told me to go to a specific place 125 miles away. And she said it was important that I go there and camp out. So I did. I was there for a week, and the very last night there, I saw 12 spaceships. And matter of fact, it's kind of strange because just above one of the spaceships, a great big jet airliner went by, way high up. So these round glowing objects that were very close were easy to see the next mountain over. But then about, I'm going to say about 75 yards away behind me, maybe even 50 yards up in the trees, there was one hovering and moving around at treetop level. Now, they took me that night, but again, they brought me back the same time. They said in time that they're going to take me to live with them, and they want me to write my third book about my experiences there. So it could happen this year or next year, whenever they feel I'm ready, based on my vibrations and my thoughts. Now, it was very interesting that a person, a good friend of mine, came to pick me up the next day. And when he did, he was very excited. And I had been there a week, and he was driving me to different areas that Haloti had suggested. Now, he said he just stopped to get a pack of cigarettes 20 miles away in a small little tiny town, and I'd been in that town, and just not much there. Maybe there's 500 people or 600 people in the town, but they have a big general store and a gas station, all kind of combined and everything. And he stopped there, and he says there was a big commotion. There were two turkey hunters that turkey season started 1 week away, but they were out, which I guess was legal, but dumping corn in certain places so they'll know they're in the area, and it gives them a better chance to get a turkey. Well, they said, strangely enough, they were right behind me, about, again, 75 yards, parked somewhere on an old dirt road behind me and at the edge of this wilderness. And they told my friend that, and they were telling all these other people because they were so shocked, that they got up at 4:30 and made a fire and started making coffee. And this spaceship came right over the trees and then over them, and then this light shined down on them. They freaked out, quickly threw dirt on the fire, threw everything they could in their camper that they had, and headed out. They were scared out of their wits. They were driving down the dirt road and went around a corner, and there were two Sasquatch standing there. One beside the road, and the biggest one was in the middle of the road. And they were going so fast because they were scared that they didn't have time to stop, and they realized they were going to hit him. But the Sasquatch, very relaxed way, they said, turned and looked right at him, and they drove right through him. He dematerialized, and they drove right through him. And that freaked him even more. And, of course, I was close by right there and experienced a lot of this that night before, totally unaware that these hunters were camped out there.
Wow, you can imagine the screaming that was going on in that car. And on that occasion, they were out there to hunt for turkeys rather than in the previous instance when they're out there actually hunting Sasquatch.
Yeah, no, they're not. They didn't even believe in Sasquatch or anything like that. That's why they were in shock.
So they see a UFO beam a light down onto them, and then a little while later, in a panic state, they see Sasquatch, and they drive right through the Sasquatch. That's a wonderful story. Kelly, in the time we got left in the first half, did you want to comment on that or add something to that from your own experiences and perspective?
Yes. Well, as far as being able to see the Sasquatch in their natural habitat or having any knowledge about that, it really all kind of depends on their consciousness level as well. Because just like humans, there's different levels of consciousness. Some that have been here longer and have attained much more wisdom and developed a lot more psychic abilities. So some of the lower density or lower consciousness Sasquatch or forest people spend more time on Earth. And so, they could live in the forest or caves and things like that, but they still maintain their psychic abilities so that they can elude humans and stay safe. But they may not have as many abilities as some of the more evolved ones. And the more evolved Sasquatch, they're not restricted to this planet nearly as much. They're able they travel more often, either through portals or they're also able to use wormholes or use multi-location or bi-location, where they can consciously be in more than one location at once. And so they particularly, I guess if you were to say where they reside, it's not a physical place, but it would be considered like the fifth dimension of consciousness. But they often say that that's where collectively where their consciousness lies is in the fifth dimension, which is beyond here. So they're not restricted to time and space and things like that. So their outlook on all of those material type matters are much different from ours here. But I have been in vision and, meditation. I have visited that realm, that fifth dimension, a couple different times, where I've been to a couple different places. Once it looked like we were outside, but the colors were so brilliant and vibrant, and there were colors that don't even exist in our world. So it's kind of hard to explain, but there were flowers everywhere, different kinds of flowers. There was a mountain in the background that looked like it was made out of crystal. But also there was just such a light feeling. There was also some kind of ambient music playing. And I was very much, like, my psychic abilities were very tuned in, and I was able to manipulate different things, basically time travel, or I could just jump up in the air and start flying and things like that. So it was very much a different reality than what it is here. Another time they took me on a journey, which was like a different time continuum, but it was underground, and it was in a space that looked like a bunch of catacombs. It was carved out of stone underground, and it's where most of the Sasquatch were residing, whichever tribe that may have been. But it was a place that was lit with some kind of bioluminescence. It had lighting in there, but it wasn't electricity. And then there was also like a rainbow creek that flowed through it. It was water, but the water sparkled like a rainbow, and it was a very beautiful and sacred place. And I could tell that it was something that they had built and prepared for themselves as well as for others. Although I'm not sure if this was past or future, because, well, it doesn't matter. Everything is simultaneous, actually. So there really isn't a past and a future. But during this journey, I was able to see this space and then travel along my own personal lives to learn more. But as far as where they live or how they live or what they do, it all is very different depending on their level of consciousness and where they kind of originate from. Some stick, the ones that are earthbound, they may live in different continents, so they live differently, just like, people in America live differently from people in Japan or something like that. So there's different ways of being in that sense. But the most highly evolved ones, their lives aren't hardly anything like ours. So it's kind of hard to describe.
We're just getting started here, folks. We've reached the end of the first segment. You've been listening to Kewaunee Lapseritis, the author of The Psychic Sasquatch and Their UFO Connection, as well as the Sasquatch people and their interdimensional connection. And we've been touching on all these different aspects in what has been a very fascinating first half. You've just been listening to Kelly Lapseritis there. We've reached the end of the first hour. If you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next hour.